You're listening to the Onside Podcast, the podcast for innovation-driven entrepreneurship here in Atlantic Canada. I'm your host, Alex McCann, and this is Season 2, Episode 15. And in this episode, we're taking a look at the power of community and collaboration in supporting innovation-based businesses. Our guest is Steve Mattier, founder, CEO, and director of Maritime Launch Services. Steve is the visionary and driving force behind Maritime Launch. A mechanical engineer by training, Steve is a skilled international spaceport licensing specialist. As part of Steve's work with Maritime Launch, he's driving the collaboration and partnerships that will support the development of a safe and environmentally sustainable commercial spaceport market in Canada. He is also passionate about learning and teaching and has driven partnerships with St. Francis Xavier University, Cape Breton University, and is a supporter of Dalhousie's CubeSat program. All right, Steve. Well, thanks so much for joining us again on the Onside Podcast, and really happy to have you here.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here very much.
So for our guests that may not have heard your background, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us a little bit who you are, how you ended up in this wonderful province of Nova Scotia. Yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself, Steve.
Sure. Thank you. I'm a mechanical engineer by training. I graduated from University of New Mexico in Albuquerque and took a position working at a NASA facility in southern New Mexico way back 30 plus years ago. And it was really that experience of working in the space shuttle program and moving forward in human space flight that really sparked my interest to continue on in this field. And I became an independent consultant in the 2000s and was helping with spaceport licensing around North America and around the world in one form or another for a spaceport or launch vehicles. And then I was roped into doing a study for identifying a location for a spaceport somewhere around North America, which is what basically landed me here. The best place that I looked at of the 14 or so different places ended up being near Canso, Nova Scotia.
Awesome. I'm sure the people of Canso are very happy and proud to be the place that you selected for this opportunity.
Most of them, yes. Yeah. I mean, I learned the lessons of Spaceport America in New Mexico, where I cut my teeth in the spaceport world. We had a governor and we had a billionaire that basically said, we're doing this, and the public could either get on board or not. And they started taxing the public, me personally, and gross receipts tax, mill levies. And it never really got above about a 50% support. So I learned that and took that lesson here. And we went to Canso, Hazel Hill, Little Dover. We met with the community. We held open houses, met with the Fisheries Association, met with the municipality of Guysborough with Warden Pitts and his team. And it was really through that engagement and openness about what we're doing and giving them that opportunity to really ask the questions. And it was their support that really founded us doing this spaceport here in Nova Scotia. Before we made the announcement that we had selected the site, in March of 2017, we had already held open houses and met a bunch with the community. And then we started the environmental review process after that.
Oh, wow. Well, I feel that we are lucky that you had those lessons learned from what didn't work out so well in the previous. Because I definitely think in Nova Scotia we were very community-oriented group of folks and really kind of understanding who's coming, why are they doing this, what's kind of the benefit, what's going on here. We're Nova Scotia is a beautiful, wonderful place, and people want to keep it that way. So having that community buy-in to make sure that it's a fit is definitely something that's super important. And I'm curious, as you were kind of going around and having your community consultations, like, were people familiar with the spaceports and satellite industry? Like, you know, as you're going around talking to some of these smaller communities and more rural parts of the province, like, what is it about satellites that got their interest? Like, why should people care about satellites and having a spaceport? Like, what's that about?
Well, I certainly remember that first open house with people coming in, streaming in just to find out if we were real or not. We had just experienced a fairly difficult election in the U.S. in October of that year, November of that year, and come see whether we are real or not was one of the things that I think was interesting about that. But then explaining to them what we're doing and why we're doing it, the benefits of satellites in orbit and what they're doing for, I mean, look at the Webb telescope or the Hubble telescope and some of the images that are coming from that. You look at the space shuttle program and all the benefits to humankind that have come from that, to the computing power from the first space shuttle compared to what's on my cell phone right now. Our cell phone has more.
I know,
it's just incredible, right? Yeah. So the opportunities that space has really brought forward and afforded to us is really hard to understate. So helping people understand what that potential is. And then when you look at the new stuff, right, the global broadband, the near-Earth imaging, things that can help us monitor our climate and hopefully gather the information we need to make some of the changes that can minimize some of the effects of climate change. Those are all really important things. And then communication in rural parts of Canada is a real issue, and something that helps resolve or provide some solution for that is important.
Well, I think that's excellent. And I'm assuming that people got on board with everything, because now you just had a recent announcement that you've been approved to move ahead with actually building the spaceport. And for those that hadn't heard, why don't you give them a little preview of kind of what's happening at the moment?
Yeah, so we had started an environmental review process back in 2017, registration document, and responsive in all kinds. Trump Consulting prepared that with us, and it was accepted and reviewed, and the province decided they wanted to see a focus report, some more details like what does a rocket launch facility look like? And we completed that and got it submitted and got an approval from the Minister of Environment in June of 2019. So since then, we've been working to do all the remaining studies. We've done 60-something bird studies and wetland mitigation plans, et cetera, to really get us to this point. So we got the Crown land lease approved from the province a week and a half ago, and then the EA was approved to start construction here just we announced on Monday. We're working with the province on that piece. Yeah. So construction is imminent.
Oh, that's exciting. I can't wait. I guess you'll have like a little ceremony to like break ground or, do something like that. That sounds super exciting. So one thing we talked about that I think is interesting is that you said that Maritime Launch and what you're doing is a commercial spaceport. So what is a commercial spaceport, and how is that different from something else?
All but one spaceport in the Earth today are government ranges, whether they're federal government or state governments or even city governments. They are owned by governments, and they have a different motive. Theirs are about building economic opportunity, about spending the money to build the spaceport. They're not really looking at it from a return on investment. But now we've got a commercial launch site that is focused on return on investment, that has investors that are participating in it, that want to see a benefit to this. So building the launch site safely and effectively and efficiently is important and much better than some of the antiquated government ranges that are out there. They've been around for 60 plus years. So we have the benefit of building on new technology and miniaturization of things and the advances in science and electronics, et cetera, to really build something that's new and exciting and innovative for the Earth and for Canada in this case. So, as a commercial launch site, we have commercial customers, but we also could have a DoD or D&D customer as well if they have a satellite they want to put in orbit. But at the end of the day, it's about delivering when and where that these customers want them, whether it's companies across Canada that are building satellites or around the world that are building satellites. It's really about getting them to where they need to be. Other ranges, West Coast, East Coast in the U.S., for example, their Air Force bases or have their own missions and their own priorities, where our own mission and our own priority is to serve our commercial customers. This is part of that advancement that came after the space shuttle landing when low Earth orbit was essentially ceded to commercial industry. How can you have a commercial industry with no commercial spaceports? And cracking that code and how to turn this into something that has a very respectable return on investment, that's a mouthful, for our investors is really one of the key pieces, I think, going forward that's making a difference. It's where we have to go. Big governments can do deep space stuff with Artemis and Mars and the moon and things like that, but low Earth orbit, where we can do all these advances and all these very cool things in science that can help our planet and really promote commercial industry development, can be done from a commercial spaceport.
And who are some of the kind of customers that you're talking about? So if they're not the sort of the government, the DoD and all that kind of stuff, like who are the people who are looking to launch satellites nowadays?
It really does cover the waterfront. I would speak to the industry types rather than naming names
Right. Yes,
at this point.
certainly.
So, I mean, global broadband is one of them, and near-Earth imaging, synthetic aperture radar, hyperspectral imaging for monitoring climate change and looking for methane leaks out west. There's so much science that people are developing, and guess what? Their satellites are sitting on the ground. They've got to get them into orbit. And that's the only way that their companies then can succeed. So there's a real host, and it's growing by the day. There was a European company just 6 weeks ago that announced a €3 billion investment to build a satellite constellation for remote control of vehicles in the EU. So there's these tens, hundreds, thousands of these satellites that people want to put into these constellations to put in orbit to do these things. It's not like the old days where you have a 10 or 15 ton satellite that's 20 or 30,000 kilometers from Earth geosynchronous orbit. It's about low Earth orbit, 1,000 kilometers up, with 150 kilogram down to a CubeSat, which can be less than 2 or 3 kilograms in size. The technology people are packing into some of these CubeSats is quite phenomenal. Our space agency here has been fostering development at the universities, what's called a CubeSat program. Dalhousie is one of the recipients that just completed theirs that got packed at an event here in Montreal just a few weeks ago. It'll be launched aboard the SpaceX rocket going to the International Space Station. So that's very cool, and that kind of opportunity I think is really moving forward at a fast pace.
I think I actually met a student from Dalhousie. I think one of your staff introduced me to her, who I think was working on this or was part of this competition that you mentioned. So young woman at Dal studying, I think she was doing rocket propulsion, and she was entering in this competition. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. I just love this idea of all these young women going into these areas that are a burgeoning field and being on that cutting edge. It's really interesting. You're talking about the kinds of customers, the kinds of industries, whether it's climate solution or climate monitoring, environmental monitoring, broadband, all of these kinds of things that are looking to leverage the technology that's coming out. But I guess also being a commercial spaceport is kind of a new business model as well. How is this model different kind of from the others that are out there? What's making it a little bit different?
I'll speak from personal experience from my NASA days, right? So in the space shuttle program and the amount of bureaucracy or red tape or processes that are involved, there's a balancing act. There's a way too much QA on top of QA on top of QA that doesn't add any value to others on the other end of a spectrum where they're, cowboys trying to throw stuff into space. There's a middle of the road, right, where you don't have to have all the additional layers of QA that don't, for example, that don't really provide any real tangible safety or quality benefit, but is still going to respectfully deliver those satellites into orbit safely. And so to me, that's where commercial spaceports are all 65, 70 years old or older around the globe. And the old logic buckets and wiring and stuff like that. Now you can use a graphical user interface to launch a rocket, and the workings that go into running and developing and operating a facility like that are significantly different than the old days. And those older days required a lot more human involvement in every aspect of it. Where with technology today, you can have the checks and balances in place that can maintain and run it safely, but still, not have as huge a staff to be able to do it. So there's that cost component. There's the older facilities and aging facilities component to it, and the technology advances that I think will make a commercial space something that'll be the model for disruption elsewhere in this industry. We've been invited to look at other locations internationally by another one just in the last few days, that really would like us to look at repeating our model somewhere else. Project Management 101, focus on the one you're working on, no scope creep, thank you very much. But nonetheless, that interest is certainly there in changing this model instead of always being dependent on government ranges. CubeSats are sitting on the ground, satellites are sitting on the ground, not getting where they need to be because of the limited locations and priority payloads from other government ranges.
So you're essentially providing this key service at a moment in time when there's so much demand to get up there, and you just can't get launch time or whatever from a lot of these other facilities, or the timing or the cost to do it elsewhere is prohibitive.
It's the when you want to go, but it's also the where you want to go. I mean, there's rideshare programs where the main payload of a larger rocket carries a large satellite and then has some extra space. Well, there's extra space they fill in wherever they can. But you don't get to say where that rocket's going to go. No. You get to go to space and you get dumped off where they tell you because the principal mission is the principal mission. Yeah. So being able to tailor missions, I think, more appropriately is really something the industry is looking for.
Interesting. And in terms of developing your team to be able to put together the Spaceport and Maritime Launch, like what kind of people do you, I mean, this is a pretty high-tech industry, and then you're operating here in Canada, here in Nova Scotia. What does developing a team look like for this kind of initiative?
I have the benefit of having worked in the industry for a long time. So, the hardest part for me today is I'm a CEO that needs to take off my technical hat and be more CEO. So it's really about tapping into the resources that I know are available and building mentorship and training programs. I've got a fantastic team here in Halifax already that are hitting it by the numbers, former astronauts, experts with airspace, Transport Canada, communications, operations, space industry in Canada, et cetera. And they're all fantastic. And now we're in this construction phase. Now I've got to start planning for that operations phase. How are we going to build the specialty support equipment, get it in place, and get it up and running and operating? So we've got a huge, like I did in the environmental review process, I tapped resources in the U.S. in people that have worked in the spaceport and NASA safety, environment, et cetera, for decades. And we're able to bring them up to be a part of this environmental review process. It'll be the same thing to help build some of that infrastructure that we have here. We have this tons of capability already existing with the university infrastructure and the high-tech industry, and the shipbuilding, et cetera, that already exists. It's basically getting them to turn a little bit and look at it differently and see that their skills really do fit very well with what we're planning for the spaceport. But we need to give them some mentorship and guidance. So it's building those programs, those training programs, OJT exercises that will really flesh this thing out. That will be 100% Canadian.
That's really exciting that this is happening here, and kind of that pivot and talent and capacity building is going to be happening here kind of in our region. And hopefully that will expand and we'll have more capacity, more people doing these kinds of things, and also creating more opportunities for young people coming out of, we've got great engineers and, all kinds of folks here in Atlantic Canada, especially Dalhousie and, some of the other universities and community colleges as well. So creating a different path, I think, towards this industry is really, really going to be really interesting.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And I was really surprised to look across Canada and see how much propulsion development there is at various universities. They build these experimental rockets and they go down to the States and participate in launch programs, universities. And, we've been winning them almost hands down every year for years. So there's this huge infrastructure of students that are coming out of these universities with all this background of having built rockets and propellant and gas systems and have no place to go in Canada until now. Interesting. If you had a kind of like a wish list of things that could be helpful or supportive for your industry or for maritime launch or spaceport industry kind of here in Nova Scotia, whether it was certain kinds of programming that would be developed or, in the universities or I don't know, other kinds of incentives or things like that. Are there certain things that could help
pave the way to make things faster or more efficient? Or like, what would be your wish list of things that would, I feel like maybe I'm in dangerous territory here, but what would be are there things that you're like, oh, I really wish we had this here in our region because that would really allow us to move 10 times faster or solve a big problem?
Well, it's really interesting because a lot of it already is there. It's just about applying it differently. The community college has a great program that will provide a lot of the foundational training that I need for a person to come out to the site to get additional training to be successful. The university programs here don't have, they're looking at satellites or looking at robotics, et cetera, like that, but they're not looking at rocket launch. They're not looking at the fluids and gas systems and control systems and instrumentation systems that are needed to build and operate a launch facility and launch rockets into space. So we don't have a rocket group here in Canada. So the former mayor of Canso has a small club. Mayor White, Ray White, has got a group that they do model rockets. But more of that would be better, certainly.
Okay. Well, I'll have to keep that in mind for the next time that I'm in Canso. And you talked a little bit earlier in the program about the community support that you've been able to build up. How important has that been? And have there been any collaborations or partnerships that have been particularly meaningful as you've been going down this path?
The community has been great to work with, and certainly going up and working and sharing with them what the plans are, meeting with the lobster fishermen and the Fisheries Association, meeting with the Guysborough municipality and their leadership and understanding what a collaboration like this could look like and what the ups and downs of this industry are really important. Working with the Bakken is the closest First Nations community, and then of course with the KMKNO and the larger, broader group, and that has been really beneficial for us. And I think there's a real measure of what this potential is by them, even more so than some of the federal regulators that I've had to deal with. They're more supportive than many of the others because they recognize that the minimal impact and the maximum potential benefit to the communities and stuff. So there has been a lot of that. We have an agreement in place with St. Francis Xavier University, an MOU that looks at expansion of opportunities to work together. They're actually doing an air monitoring program for us. We've got an agreement in place with Cape Breton University that are doing a water sampling program for us. Working with some of the students out of the Dow CubeSat program as well. Recently, a company just started up here in Halifax. It's Galaxia Mission Systems to build their own satellites as well. And he came out of that CCP program, or the Canadian Space Agency. So I think there's really some key collaborations like that. And then just really working with the provincial government, whether it's Department of Natural Resources and Renewables, Economic Development Department, the Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change. That all those folks are really key in our success for sure.
That's great. It's great to hear about all the partnerships and with the universities and pulling them in. I think I'm gonna have to do a little bit more digging on the CubeSat program at Dow. I think that just sounds super fascinating. If I had more time,
I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of our earlier investors that are strategic investors. Lindsay Construction, for example.
Oh, okay.
They're our construction management company. Corey shared our vision back in 2017 and made some initial seed investment in our company. The folks over at Nova Construction, Donald Chisholm, also early investors in Maritime Launch from a strategic perspective. And, he is certainly supporting our civil work out there right now too. So certainly some key partnerships, not just in universities, but also in industry as well.
Yeah, well, I think that's also important as well to kind of recognize there's sort of tangible on the ground things that actually need to happen in addition to kind of the research and just on the investment piece. And you mentioned some kind of local investors who had kind of that broad vision for the future. Is it generally difficult to pull investment into this kind of industry because the time horizon is really long, between the time that you go through even the process to get the environmental permit so you can have your building so that you can be approved, and your lease, and, getting things up and going, and then you got to launch, you got to deliver, so that you're not building an app. Right? You're not building an app. You're not going to see revenue return and growth within 18 months and then, have an exit in 2 years. What's it like to try to bring investors into the company? Is that difficult in the industry?
Short answer is yes. In Canada and in Nova Scotia, certainly. But, I'd characterize that especially true for the first few years, where we're working through environmental assessments and land leases and everything else. And the last 13, 15 months or so, though, we've really made some significant inroads with some investors, and close to $20 million. We've also gone public. We're listed on the NEO exchange here and cross-listed in the U.S., which adds a level of benefit to investors, liquidity, I guess is the term they're looking forward to, that allows them to monitor, share prices and everything else. So we've had a really good run here as of late, and now we're hitting it with some major pieces that de-risk the project. So the timing is really important this last 15 or so months, and kind of where we are today and construction starting. It certainly opens up that opportunity for people to see that, hey, this isn't an if project, this is a when project. And all those kind of pieces are really coming together in place. Yeah.
Well, I got to give kudos off to the early investors who jump in there when it's more of an idea, and I don't say hope and a dream, but because I'm sure now that things are moving ahead, you'll have more and more people kind of knocking on your door.
The most key investors, though, are my partner, Anne. Hyatt and Kia moved them up here 4 years ago, went through some thin times to get through the risky parts. And it's their vision and sweat equity that I think has really, brought us to today, that we can now celebrate these recent successes and look and move forward.
Yeah, that's super great. That's super great. I'm glad that you mentioned your family and all of the work that they have to do just to be able to make this happen, because it's a journey for everybody.
It takes a community.
It really does. It really does. Well, I had just one more question I wanted to throw out at you, and I appreciate you sharing so much kind of about the journey and where you're going with the company. But one thing we're always curious about and thinking about at Onside, we're focused on inclusive, innovation-driven entrepreneurship, and we want to see more of this kind of entrepreneurship take place in Atlantic Canada, rural places, and, all over the place. But what does innovation-driven entrepreneurship mean to you?
It's about looking at what you're doing on a regular basis every day and looking at it differently and seeing how it might be able to be done better, faster, cheaper, whatever, higher quality, better customer satisfaction, whatever it is. It's really about keeping an open mind to everyday things that you're doing and seeing, considering how that might be done better. The thing that gives you a pet peeve, well, take a look at that and try to think how it might be able to be done differently. For me, the commercial space industry is an obvious, no-brainer, right? We've got a commercial space industry at $400 billion US per year, growing to $1 trillion in the next 18 years. And how can it be a commercial space industry with only government ranges? So, are we commercial or not, right? So are we making the use of the Air Force or NASA or whatever to do this stuff? So it's really taking a look at what's normally been done and looking where industry trends are going, and then turning it upside down and taking a look at it differently.
Interesting. I love asking this question to all of our guests. We get really interesting answers, but I really appreciate your take on it. So with that, I want to say thank you for joining us here on the Onside podcast. For folks who want to learn more about Maritime Launch or follow along with your progress and your success, or maybe make an investment, where can people go to learn more about you and your company?
Well, our investment ticker is MaxQ in Canada on the NEO exchange. MaritimeLaunch.com, of course, is a website, as you would not be surprised to find. And then we are Spaceport Nova Scotia. That is the site we're building, and you'll find a website with a little more information about the site, the community liaison committee, and the kind of inner workings of things at Spaceport Nova Scotia website as well.
Okay. Well, that sounds perfect. We'd like to let our guests know where they can reach you. And for guests who would like to learn a little bit more about OnSide, I encourage you to check out our Inclusive Innovation Monitor, which is on our website, onsidenow.ca. And as we come to a close, I'd really like to thank Communities, Culture, and Heritage for your support. We're so grateful for your support in helping us make this podcast. And please like and subscribe to our podcast, and hope you'll join in for our next one. Thank you.
This
has been
a Podstarter
production.